years. And so I'm just going to share with you a playbook that I used at a company that turned out to be very successful. So I'm not saying it's the right or wrong way to do employee engagement. I'm just saying this is the model that we used. So let's jump in and get started. How's that? Okay. So first of all, just like who am I? That's me. That picture has to be 20 years old. Wow. Anyway, so yeah, Randy Woehl. I'm a certified Maxwell leadership team member, so I do a lot of leadership training around John Maxwell, certified disc trainer and coach. And then I do some HR consulting. I have a company called Higher Level Consult HR Consulting. Haven't really advertised it. It's not really out there right now, so I'm just really kind of starting that process. I'm semi-retired, so how I define that is I do what I want and not what I have to. So that's my idea of retirement. So anyway, it's a little bit about me. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about the agenda real quickly. So I'm going to share with you kind of, what I think employee engagement is. Okay, some of the things that I discovered and some of the research that I've done. And then I'm going to give you kind of a brief outline of kind of a case study, like what actually happened in the organization that I was at. And then we'll talk about the playbook, like the 4 E's of employee engagement that we used. And then we'll just kind of summarize it at the end. Okay. So any questions at this point? No? All right, here we go. So, hold on, I need to move let me move these out of the way. I need to figure out where to put my pictures. Yeah, give me just a second here. All right. So what is employee engagement? So, I kind of liked Simon Sinek. He said, he has this quote. He says, when people are financially invested, they want to return. When people are emotionally invested, they want to contribute. So when I think about employee engagement, that's what I think about. And then I say, Kevin Cruz says employee engagement is the emotional commitment the employee has to the organization and its goals. So when I talk about employee engagement, it can be defined as team members who are physically and emotionally connected to the business. And here's what I see around engaged employees. Number one, they give a discretionary effort at work, meaning that people that are truly engaged in the work are willing to do more than their job description says. That's what I talk about with discretionary effort, that they are truly bought into the mission and the vision and the values of the organization, and they're willing to jump in and help, even if it's not on their job description. So they don't really look at it from that perspective. They look at it, how can I help this company be successful, right? And then what is the return on me helping? So I think we talk about discretionary effort. The second thing is engaged employees desire to perform meaningful work. And I go back to when the millennials hit the workforce. The millennials were really the first generation, according to some of the research that I've seen, um, who really said, "Why am I doing what I'm doing? I mean, I want there to be some meaning to my work. I don't want to just come in and just do stuff every day and then walk out. I want there to be some purpose." And I think statistically, they say that millennials, uh, back when that generation hit kind of the working age, they also said that millennials volunteered at a higher rate than any generation in the history of the United States. So it tells you that they kind of want this purpose. They kind of want to give back, right? They want to do something that there's this greater good. Like I'm contributing to the greater good. I'm not just doing a particular job. The third thing that when I think about employee engagement is employee engagement acts as partners versus hired hands. And so how I define that is hired hands work for what they get and they do only what they're told. Partners work for what they can give and they find ways to to contribute and they find ways to make things better. So when we talk about the partner versus the hired hand, it's partners are they they're working for what they can get, not for what they can give. And the partners are working for what they can give and they're finding ways to get better. The other thing that we saw with the employee engagement was, our employees understood and bought into our organization's mission and our vision. So that was a big part of it, was like establishing this mission that people could really understand, that it wasn't just words on paper, but that they understand that there was this line of sight between what do I do on a daily basis and how does it contribute to the greater good of the organization? How does it benefit our customers? How does it benefit our vendors? I mean, we got even to that point. So we found that they were buying in to the mission and the vision. And then the next thing was that, they contribute their ideas. Team members were willing and able, right? We talk about, the new buzz term now is psychological safety. Well, we created some psychological safety in our organization where we said, look, if you have ideas around innovation and creativity, we want you to speak up, right? We're not going to tell you how to do something. You're on the front lines. You help us, right? You help us fix stuff. And so we really found out that that was very successful. And then we found that, because they understood the mission and the vision and they were able to contribute, that they were more apt to accept changing circumstances and setbacks because they saw the bigger picture. Okay. They saw the outcomes that that we were coming. And then certainly the last piece, what we saw was people actually started to work to improve business outcomes, which was a huge piece for the organization that I was in. So any questions, comments around that? Did any other thoughts around when you think about what employee engagement, did I miss some of these?
I
Anybody?
think that I don't think you missed anything. I think that that's really key is connecting them to the mission and vision and not just, the goal of we want to increase revenue, we want to decrease quality issues. We want, it's having that true connection. And I think you do that in a way where you're also making that connection of what the employee is doing to the bigger picture. And I think
Yeah.
I think a piece that organizations miss.
Yeah, we were really big on the line of sight because when I went in and talked to employees, they didn't understand. They were just doing a job and they didn't understand how it contributed a lot of times. I'm like, what? They're like, well, this is what I do. And I'm like, you do understand that, in one situation I said, you unilaterally have the ability. We were a freight forwarding company. I said, you unilaterally have by your job, you literally have the ability to stop the shipment by what you do and don't do. And the person was like, oh my gosh, I just thought I did this. And I'm like, no, your job is critical to the success of this. We move military people, of getting people from point A to point B. When it gets to you, if you don't do what you need to do and you don't do it correctly and timely, you stop the shipment, meaning that our military members get to their next location and they don't have their goods. And he was like, oh my gosh, I never really thought about it that way. And so we really, that was really the other thing, Michelle, to your point, while we had an overarching mission, we developed an overarching mission and vision for our organization. What we did, and I'll talk about it in the other part, was we went to each department, and each department, we developed a mission statement for each department. Because what we found is that it's easier for people to grasp onto what do I do on a daily basis and how does it contribute to my department's success, which then contributes to the overall mission. Because they can't really, it's hard for them to connect to what I do on a daily basis, and then it connects to this huge mission up on top of the organization. So we really tried to bring it down into the department level, and that was really helpful. So people understood what am I doing and how does it contribute to department success, which ultimately contributes to the organizational success.
I would
It
also,
reminds me,
excuse
oh,
Oh,
me.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
it reminds me of the NASA story where if you asked
Oh,
anybody in NASA, whether it was a janitor or, a physicist, what do you do? And they said, I'm putting a man on the moon.
Right.
yeah, that's exactly right.
So
And
my comment would be just just what Megan said. It goes beyond the individual and their engagement. True engagement to me means the company or the organizational mission and vision is theirs. They adopt
Yeah.
They're part of it. And that's the difference between a great culture and not.
Yeah.
And
we,
that result at the bottom line is incredibly
yeah.
multifolded. That means many times the return for the effort that people put forth.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. We each department developed their own mission. They sat in a room with me and we sat down and we developed their own mission. And even the organizational mission, before we rolled it out, we had a focus group that talked about it. Like, what does this mean to you? Is this something that you can get behind? Is this something that resonates with you? So it wasn't like we just developed this mission and said, here's our mission. We really started to bring people in together, which I think to your point, John, is a huge piece, right? That's that whole, wait a minute, I'm a part of this, right? I'm contributing, but not only that, it's easy to ask for their level of commitment because you can go to them and say, look, you were part of this. You developed this mission. You said you were committed to this mission. So so stay in the game, right? So stay in the game because this is what you wanted.
I like that approach too, when it's like the NASA example is great. And we did that at one of the companies I was with where, because the mission and vision are usually long statements. And so we kind of chopped it down to we're improving patient lives. And so we just put a number on it. Like our goal is to improve 1 million patient lives. And it was something, Megan, to your point with NASA, that everybody could say, this is what we're doing, right? And a rallying cry or something to get behind. I think when you don't have a company that has something like my friend Tracy, people know Tracy Sponenberg, one of the companies she worked for, the Granite Group, they sold toilets, right? And so you can't, it's hard to make that something like super exciting for people.
Yeah.
Like, I sell toilets. So, they did something similar where they, crafted a message that people could get behind that, when it's not so glamorous. I like the example of maybe putting it down to the department level too, of like, how are we contributing to the greater good and the greater goals of the company.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that a little bit, Michelle, about why kind of what we saw when we did that. So anyway, let's go back in kind of in the case study. So this was a 40-year-old third generation family owned business. We had about 120 employees. I was really hired as their first HR director. And then really after about the first 3 months, I was observation. I'm like, these people don't really understand what they're doing. I mean, I literally spent the first 3 months sitting next to people in their cubes, asking them questions about what do you do? How do you do this? Why do you do this? I literally sat out there and everybody was freaked out. They're like, why is the HR person out here? He's going to fire us all. And I'm like, no, I said, in order for me to be effective, I need to eat, drink, and breathe your culture. I need to see what you do. I need to understand what you do. And what I found is that, again, people just didn't understand. Like they didn't understand the flow of how a shipment was flowed. They only understood their one little piece. And when I started sharing the big picture and we started to put together process flows, they were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, right? And so I talked to the ownership. I said, look, we need to employee engagement survey. Let's get this. Let's find out where our employees are. And we used many of the Gallup survey questions that were pretty standard. The initial results that came out were not good. They were about 62% engaged. The other piece was the company had not been profitable in the past 2 years, which was kind of a shot over the bow for me because when I got hired on the company, I said, I didn't ask them to look at their financial statement. I asked them if they were making money, and they told me they were. And then I found out that they weren't, that they were living off a line of credit. And I'm like, oh my God, I just got onto a sinking ship. I left a good job and went into this organization. I thought, oh my God, my wife's going to be like, why did you get with a company that's losing money? And I said, well, because I'm going to go in and fix it. Now they had low turnover. There was a lot of tenure in the organization, but it was due to some of it was low productivity. People just weren't producing, but they didn't do anything about it. So again, when we started rolling out the engagement model, we were able to identify that. So anyway, that was kind of the study. So here's what happened after we rolled out the model. Within 18 months, we increased the engagement by 21 basis points. Our engagement went from 62% to 83% in about 18 months. We saw increased profitability. We saw productivity measurements that were identified and improved. The employee morale was off the charts. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but because we rolled out quarterly incentives based on departmental results. The first time that we handed the paychecks, so I said, I don't want to direct deposit these bonus checks. I told my payroll company, I said, I want a paper check. And then I went to the ownership and I said, and I want you guys, there were three brothers. I said, I want you guys to go out and deliver these checks to each of the employees and hand it to them person by person and shake their hand and thank them for it was emotional. We had people that really, some people went to tears and people said, I didn't believe this was going to happen. You talk about this and we're like, we thought there's no way that this is going to happen. So anyway, we really saw some nice results from the model. So any questions, any comments? Now I'm going to jump into the E's because we're running out of time. Anyone? Bueller? Okay. So let's talk about the 4 E's that we used in the engagement playbook. The 4 E's were educate, enable, empower, and engage. So I'm going to go through kind of each one of these. I'm going to hit them kind of at a high level. So the first E that we talked about is educate. And what this was educating your team members about the organization, answering the questions of who are we, what is our mission, and what is our purpose? Where do we want to go? What is our vision? And then what guides our behavior, our values, right? And then we talked about how is work done here? And how do we define success? So I use this fictitious conversation between a manager, right? When I think about educating, I'm thinking about people need to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they need to understand the business aspect that if I do this, this happens, right? So we even got into the financial piece where we started sharing financial information with people. Because I asked the employees when I first got there, I said, are we profitable or aren't we? And the one employee said to me, well, I get my check every 2 weeks. So that's how he was basing on whether the company was profitable or not, which in fact we really weren't, quite honestly. So I have this little fictitious conversation that I thought it says, the manager says, hey, will you get behind this strategy? And the team member says, well, what strategy? And the manager says, well, don't worry about that. Just buy into the strategy. Team member says, I'm not getting behind a strategy to nowhere. I might not like it. Manager says, trust me, you'll enjoy it. Team member says, do you have any guidelines to follow? Manager says, no, we don't need any guidelines. I'll just show you the way. Team member says, you need to find someone else. I'm not interested. So what we really tried to do is we tried to say, look, we need to educate you about the business. You need to understand this business inside, outside, and upside down. And I looked at these statistics. It said, according to Forbes, mission-driven workers are 54% more likely to stay in your organization. And 30% are more likely to grow into high performers. And then it says 81% of those working for companies with strong mission statements hold a higher trust for their leadership team. So there's this real, important piece around getting this good mission and this good vision. And again, as we said, we drilled it down into the department level because I wanted people to be able to understand at their level, what do I do and how does it support the mission of my department? So that is kind of the education piece. So everybody that came into our organization, we went through this piece about who we are. How do we make money? How does this process work? How do our shipments work? All this kind of stuff. We did a real solid job, I think, of just educating people so that they knew what they were doing on a daily basis. Questions, comments on the education piece?
I would just comment, that's exactly what HR needs to do as well.
Say that again.
HR needs to know exactly the same things about the company. They need to know how that company works, how it makes money, is it profitable, what's the mission, everything. They need to know the company inside out as well.
And was that John? You said that, John?
Yes.
Yeah, John, uh, I guess I've been in I was in HR for about 25 years, but prior to that, spent 13 years at Toys R Us. So I came out of operations. I was running $1 million toy stores. So I understand how to make money. I can read a financial statement, right? I know what EBITDA is. I understand, cost of goods, gross margin, net margin. And so I really tried to bring that into that organization too, of saying, look, I need to know your business so I can help you with this. And I think when you talk about it, John, a lot of times I think HR gets a bad rap because we don't. The consultant said to me, he goes, Randy, what's your job? And I said, I'm the HR director. He goes, no. He said, I'm going to ask you again. He goes, what's your job? And I said, I'm an HR director. He goes, no. And I'm like, Jesus, Tom, I'm an HR director. He goes, no, your job is to make money for the company. Your role is an HR director.
Oh.
He said, he said, nobody gets a mulligan, right? Nobody gets a mulligan in an organization. Everybody in a for-profit organization is there to make money for the organization. It's just, what is your role? So when he told me that, I'm like, wow, I had to think of things. I continue to think of things differently, more like a business person. All right. So let's talk about enable. So this enablement, involves providing team members with the tools that enable them to do their job. And so I think a big part of when I talk about management and leadership, I said your role is to provide the environment in which people can perform their job at the optimum level. And the way that you do that is you need to provide the tools. And these tools can be physical tools, right? Computers, just simple things of computers, a decent desk, a decent chair. I mean, some of those tangible things that people need to be able to do their jobs. And then there's the intangible things, right? Uh, Now we start talking about, um, you know, the intangibles. We start talking about training, coaching, feedback, dashboards and scorecards, team building, clear direction, role clarification, removing obstacles. All of those things that you do enable people to do their jobs. So let me spend just a little bit of time. Each department in this organization, we sat down with them when we developed scorecards. I said to the manager, how do you define success in your department? And they're like, well, I don't really know. And I said, well, let's start looking at some metrics. So we developed leading and lagging indicators for every department in the organization. And each department had a scorecard. And the employees had access to this scorecard. And the scorecard, we updated it on a monthly basis. And you had red, green, and yellow. Okay. Red was bad, right? The metric was bad. Green, the metric was on target. Yellow, the metric was caution. If at the end of the month we had something in the red or something in the yellow, we did what we called department action teams or department action planning, where we sat down with the employees in that department in a group and we did an action plan to determine what was the root cause that caused that metric, us to miss that metric. And we actually went through root cause analysis. We then came up with solutions that the employees bought into. And then we assigned certain tasks to the employees to get those solutions to increase that particular metric. So when you talk about enablement, that's enablement. Not in addition to it, we're going to talk about the next piece, is that we now had, again, we were driving commitment from our people because it wasn't just us as management or the managers telling employees, here's what you need to do to improve. It was the employees saying, oh, here's what we need to do to improve. And we saw a lot more buy-in from people from that perspective. So the enablement piece, again, just to put it in real easy terms, provide team members with the tools to do their job. That's your role. That's the role of leadership. That's the role of management. Any comments around the enablement piece?
One of the things that I worked on before AI came out was workforce development, and we talked a lot about onboarding. We talked a lot about it being, what most people call onboarding is really just orientation. And that onboarding, we really promoted, onboarding programs that lasted well into, 3, 6, even up to 12 months, depending on the size of the organization and how complex. And that was critical in getting people to feel like they were being, enveloped and becoming a part of the organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So let's jump into the empowerment piece, the next E. This E is around giving team members autonomy in decision making and authority and responsibility within their roles. But here's what I want to say about empowerment. Before we empowered our people, we ensured that they were educated, that they understood how do we make money? What do we do? So when people said, well, can we just buy this? I'm like, you know what our net profit is on a shipment? And they're like, well, yeah, it's 5%. I said, do you know how many thousands of dollars it takes to get to the net profit after we take off all the expenses? So if you spend $1,000, here's how much money in top line revenue we have to make to cover that $1,000. And people are like, whoa, I just never even thought about that. Right. So we started to get people to think about it. So before we empowered people, we educated them about how do we make money. And then we enabled them, right? So we gave them tools so that they had the capability and the ability to make the right decisions. And then the empowerment piece is we then defined what were you empowered to do? Very defined definitions of like, because my boss, I was like, I wanted to get some bell and whistle for HR. And he's like, well, how much is it? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like a couple of $1,000s. And he's like, that's fine. And then there was other stuff that I was going to him with, and he was like, and finally I just said to him, I said, his name was Craig. I said, Craig, just give me a limit. Do you want me to come to you every time? He goes, no. He goes, here's the deal. Anything under $5,000, spend it. I trust you. I believe in you. And the reason he did is because I understood how our company was making money, right? So I was responsible. Our bonuses, our pay increases were dependent on the profitability of the organization. I had a scorecard, right? And so it was my checkbook. It was like I was running my own business. I was careful about my spending. And that's what we got our people to do around the empowerment piece. We said, you're empowered to make decisions within this guideline. If you're going to make the decision that is outside this guideline, then you go to your manager for approval. And what we saw is increased customer satisfaction, right? Because we drove the decision making down to the lowest level of the organization, which then freed up our managers to be more strategic and more coaching and more teaching and more training, right? And it reinforced this partnership. We're like, we trust you enough to make this decision. And some of our employees were like, oh my gosh, this is
I did.
a breath of fresh air. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Did somebody have something?
I
Oh,
think
no.
that was probably a mistake, but I was thinking as you were talking through it that there has to be like that managing up as well. And there has to be that trust and psychological safety for you to go to your manager and say, do you want me coming to you this process isn't quite working. Give me the guardrails, give me the
Yeah.
boundaries. And so I think that takes some time. Is there anything you did to help build that in the organization with leaders so that employees could push back and give feedback?
Well, yeah, when I talk to each of the managers, I'm like, I want you to think differently about your job. And I said to them, your job is you manage process, but you lead your people. So you manage processes, but you lead your people. And I said, if we want this engagement model to work, you have to and that's Michelle, that's where these department action teams and department action plans, That's that really kind of broke that, what would I call, that kind of opened up that psychological safety for people to say, hey, I have this idea and I have this thought. And like when you do root cause analysis, we went around the room to each person and said, what do you think is causing this? And they said, I think it's this. And nobody, you can't comment. Nobody said, well, that's not going to work or that's not it. You literally went around the room and you put in all these root causes. And then we had people literally vote on, pick your top 5 that you think can fix this. And then we narrowed it down. But what that did, Michelle, is that opened up that psychological safety. Like there was no, you weren't allowed to comment on it. The only thing you were allowed to do was say, what do you mean by that? Like if I didn't understand, if I said, well, this is what I think is causing it, the person sitting next to you is like, I don't know what you mean by that. You were allowed to ask that question. You were not allowed to say, that will never work. And the managers, right? That's the first thing I said to your managers. So you have to take these comments and this information in silence. And I think that really helped Michelle open up the psychological safety.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
any questions on the empowerment piece or comments? All right, well, let's jump to the last one.
It looks like Scott's talking, but you're on
Oh,
mute.
Scott, you're on mute. You're on mute.
That was actually intentional. I was calling my wife. Sorry. Since
you have
you
a
put me
comment?
on here, though, what your discussion about empowerment and having a department mission statement reminded me of one of my clients a long time ago. He ran the IT department in this hospital, and he had worked with his team to build a mission statement, and he had it posted in great big letters on the wall in his office. And I think I can remember it close to verbatim. He said, we need to run this department like it was a private business, that each of us had mortgaged our homes and our cars to finance. That's
Yeah,
putting some
it
skin
makes
in
you
the game.
think differently about how you spend money
Yeah.
and whatever. And our employees, I said to them, I said, you own this. I said, you're going to determine what your quarterly bonus is going to be like,
Well,
right?
and
Based on these metrics.
in a very real sense, I used to tell people, because I was always hiring salespeople, and
Mhm.
everybody's in sales, because if
Sure.
the company doesn't make money, you don't have a job. So
That's exactly
you
right.
literally, all of these kinds of empowerment exercises are just embracing reality. They're just giving a graphic presence to people of their own reality. Because
Right.
if their organization isn't effective and profitable, they won't have a job. And people don't
Yeah.
think of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, well, we'll jump into the last piece and then we can open it up for questions and comments. The last piece is that engagement piece. So when we think about the engagement piece, this E, I think, outlines what I call the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that members receive for being highly engaged at work. So in our situation, the extrinsic reward was that they were earning quarterly bonuses. In addition, they were earning annual bonuses, which in the past had been discretionary. And I told the owners were like, well, I still want to do these discretionary bonuses. I said, no. I said, stop. I said, that's counter to what we're trying to do here. We want people, we want to pay based on productivity and based on results, right? When I got there, the owners were more focused on activity and the managers were focused on activities. What are my people doing? And I said, stop focusing on the activity, start focusing on the results. What are the results of their activities? And I said, get rid of these discretionary bonuses, base the bonuses on this, base the quarterly bonuses on things that people have control over. Because that was the other big thing. People are like, well, I don't have control over this. I'm like, oh, yes, you have control over how many invoices you process on a daily basis. You have control over how accurate you are when you send an invoice out to somebody. You have control over that. And so we really tried to get what I call those scorecards, the leading and lagging indicators on those scorecards. We really tried to get it drilled down to things that people had control over. In addition, we tried to drill it down to where it was things that had to become dependent upon each other, and departments had to become dependent upon each other. And we had these service level agreements between departments. We also introduced a saying that said, I don't produce poor quality work. I don't, no, I don't accept poor quality work. I don't produce poor quality work. And we gave the employees the authority that if somebody downstream gave them poor quality work, they had the authority to say, I'm not going to accept this. You need to go back and fix it because I'm not fixing this. In addition, if I produced poor quality work and gave it to somebody, somebody was going to give it back to me. I was the one that had to fix it. Because otherwise the stuff flows downhill, right? Somebody's got to fix it. And we really started to get ownership about quality around quality of what you're doing, not the activity, but the quality. So let's jump back in. I'm sorry, I got off. So this engagement is really about the intrinsic and the rewards. This extrinsically we had career advancement opportunities. We had bonus opportunities, quarterly bonus opportunities. It impacted their pay increases. It impacted their annual bonuses. Here's what else it impacted. Because we were more profitable, we went 3 years, did not increase our our health insurance premiums for our employees.
Wow.
We were able to eat the cost of our health insurance premiums for 3 years. And you talk about the employees we're like, yeah, we got a 7% increase this year. The company is going to eat that for you. I mean, so we were able to really show if we're profitable, here's some things I want to put back into this. And then when we talked about intrinsically, we really saw kind of this recognition program of recognizing people for their performance. We started to put together a succession planning program and developed a training program for our hypos, our high potentials and our high performers. And again, that was an offshoot of us rewarding people who were doing really good jobs that we felt had some abilities to eventually move into a leadership and a management position. That was really another piece of this because we started to really see some of the high performers and the high potential people come out of these department action plan meetings and come out of this root cause analysis and this empowerment piece. And so that was a big piece. And so when you combined all this, people are enjoying higher wages, promotions, just a much better environment that we saw. And then obviously these rewards was a positive it was a positive feedback loop, right? I'm getting paid for what I do and I'm being rewarded for what I do. And listen, we had people that we had to coach out of the business because they did not buy into this process. So we had people that didn't buy in. And that was probably the tough part because some of them were long-term people. But I told the owners, I said, we got to have everybody on board. If we don't, if we have some non-believers in this process, I said it could derail it significantly. So actually our turnover was a little bit higher in the first 18 months because we got rid of a lot of non-performers. And the engagement program helped us identify who was performing and who wasn't. And then the offshoot of this is when we developed the performance evaluations. The performance evaluations were trickled down from the scorecards. So whatever metrics were on the scorecards, now we trickled that down to individual performance. So we're able to measure individual performance versus team performance. So that's really all I have. Comments. I mean, this is probably nothing where you're going, aha, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I thought it was really, after we got done doing this, it was really a simple model when I started thinking about this. And now, just throughout my career, I've used bits and pieces of this in every organization that I've gone in and worked because I find that it really works, and I start using these terms um, successfully, honestly. So, okay, I'm going to turn it over to the group.
This is great. Thank you. Thank you, Randy. A couple of comments that I thought of as you were going through it. For the quality piece and having people own their own results, I think that's really important. I think that's a big break in the performance management process where people don't feel like they really had any ownership over their performance review at the end of the day. When I was at Dish Network a long time ago, I worked with the installer. So they went out and installed the satellite dishes on your house and the box and all of that stuff. And what they would do at the end is they would actually sign their name and their ID number on the back of the dish. And we saw quality go up significantly because they were putting their name on it. And then when the quality team would go out and check, they could come back and say, wow, John, you did a great job. Or give feedback because they knew, they knew who it was anyways that did the install because it was on the record. But that whole act of like putting your own stamp on it really drives the quality and the engagement. So similar to what you were saying, like having them take ownership. One of the questions I have though is how did you get buy-in to do this? Because engagement sometimes in an organization of non-HR pros can feel like a squishy feely topic. Oh, you're on mute, Randy.
Yeah, Michelle, that's a great question. So I worked with a consultant for a while. We actually crunched the numbers that said, if we increase this metric by this amount, or if we improve this metric by this amount, here's what it will show you from a profitability standpoint. So we actually were able to take the numbers and show that if there was an increase, for instance, so we were in a freight forwarding company, so we moved military people. We were not asset based. So everything that we did, we contracted out. So we contracted a mover, we contracted a trucking company, we contracted the ocean liner, we contracted a moving company in Europe or whatever, because we would move internationally. And so the whole goal of moving a shipment to become profitable is to get it from point A to point B before the member gets there. Because if you get it there before the member gets there, then it goes into what's called storage. And when it goes into the storage, the military actually paid our organization money every day that shipment was in storage. So our goal was to move that shipment. So we were like, that's why we did a lot of process flow. So we did process flows for every department about how does work happen inside your department. So each of the employees sat down. That was the enablement piece. We wanted you to see, how does this shipment move? How does this process work in your organization? So anyway, back to what you said, Michelle, is once we started showing the owners that if we increase these particular metrics by this percent, here's what's going to happen on the back end. And we started to see an increased revenue on the back end because we were getting shipments quicker. We were also doing a better job of finding the right agents to move our shipments, because some agents were not very good. When I say agents, those are movers. They were damaging a lot of goods, and we ended up paying a lot of damage claims. So our claims department, that was one of their metrics, was to reduce damage claims. Well, the way to reduce that was to make sure that we had the right people moving our stuff. And so that's really was kind of we went to them. They were certainly hesitant at first because this was an investment. I mean, we invested tens of thousands of dollars to get this thing up and going. I mean, I worked with a consultant for about 6 months to do this. So it was a pretty big investment, but I mean, our ROI was off the charts, honestly.
Very
and,
cool.
and let me say that, Michelle, when I got to this company, I'd worked in a regional position most of my life. So for all the other HR people that are on here, I did a really good job of communicating across and influencing across and down. What I wasn't very good at was influencing up. When I got to this organization, I learned how to influence up. I learned how to manage my manager. I learned how to influence leadership, right? And to help them buy into the processes. So that was a real growth period for me as an HR professional because I just wasn't very good at that. So I had to learn how to, kind of because I had three different brothers who had way three different personalities, three different disc profiles. So I had to like figure out how to communicate with each of them effectively.
Yeah, that's great. I think linking arms with other departments is super helpful. Something I also learned as I went through my career, that you don't have to do it yourself. Before we open it up for other questions, I just want to share that the program has been approved for one HRCI recertification credit. So use code 748-383. And if you're on the call today, we will send you an email with that code. So it's in the chat. You don't have to remember to write it down. You should get an email the next day or so from the HR Rebooted team. So we've got about 7 minutes left. If anybody has questions or examples or, similar stories.
I'm just going to comment that the empowerment piece is so critical. It can't be understated. To give people the knowledge that they can make a difference by their own actions, and that they're encouraged to make their own actions and decisions within that framework, right, is the key to engaging by implementing the first two.
And that, I think, sometimes is one of the hardest things to do, right? It seems like a simple thing, but sometimes for leaders, giving up, that what got them there as a leader is something that they want to hold on to because they were successful and got them into a leadership position. So sometimes I think teaching them to delegate and empower and trust is a learned skill.
I also think that from a manager or leadership point of view, there's a certain amount of relief that comes with knowing that you aren't dragging the whole ship yourself, that you have an entire crew of people rowing this boat with you. It's tremendously enlightening for you as a manager.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that in the terms of light versus heavy.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, and just let me add, John, you make such a good point. But I'm teaching a lot of this now in the current organization that I'm working for. So I'm teaching their management and leadership training program. I've developed it for them. And we talk a lot about empowerment. And I think the key to that empowerment piece is that education piece and that enablement piece. And that's where sometimes we empower people without educating them about the business and they don't really understand. So then they make bad decisions. And then we're like, well, I'm not going to let them make decisions anymore. They've just screwed us out of a bunch of money, or you know what I mean? So the key is that let's educate them so that they understand what is the impact of me making this decision, both from financially or even in a nonprofit. What is the impact of the level of service? Because we're using other people's money to provide a service in a non-for-profit, right? So how can I be a responsible steward of this money? How can I make the right decisions for the right reasons? And again, I think that goes back to that education piece.
I would also say that without the kind of, I call it the open door policy, Michelle talked about a safe place, a protected place. Most people know far more than their own job. They know everybody else in the company and outside companies, and to give them an ability to make suggestions and because of their observations as a way of improving the company outside their own department is also something that needs to be developed, because again, operating in a vacuum or in isolation is never a good place to be.
Yep. This has been great. Thank you, Randy, for driving the conversation today. I really appreciate it. Everyone, we have open mic next week, so feel free to jump in. That's where, for anybody that's new, we just open the floor and we can talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about. So if you have things you want to bounce off this group, that's a great opportunity to do that. So I will see you all next week.
So, Michelle, do you have another meeting right now? Do you have a minute to talk to me or not? Or do you have to go to something else?
I do have to jump to something else, but I can give you a call this afternoon if that works for you.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about some AI stuff, because
Okay.
I'm doing some consulting for a company, and we're kind of, venturing into the AI piece. They're government contractors, and plus I want to talk to you about that program that you're putting together.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll give you a call
Yeah.
this afternoon. I'll send you an email and grab your cell phone number.
Yeah.
We did open up, to Randy's point, an AI advocate program. So anyone that's consulting and talking to clients about AI, or in HR consulting that you'll be carrying AI, we're going to give our tool to you to use to help build out the framework. And so on our website, you can find the application for the AI advocate program.
Here, Michelle, I'll send you my phone number. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
great.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And that's for anybody else. If anybody else has any questions or whatever, there's my thing, and I'll put in my email also.
Snag it.
I just have a Gmail account. I don't have a business account at this point. So, okay. Well, hey, I thank you for everybody for the input. Thank you for sitting through this, and hopefully it was some stuff that will stir some gray matter, right? We can get excited about.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
great.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
so
me,
much,
Michelle.
everyone.